right in the chat box.
It's November the 5th today, and in Britain that's Bonfire Day or Guy Fawkes Day. And this session we've got for the next 30 minutes relates very directly to fireworks, but fireworks in the classroom and how you can prevent your learners letting them off. It's called Creating a Positive Learning Environment and deals with issues of discipline and motivation. It's based on materials from Inspiration, the course which Judy Garton-Sprenger and I wrote, and very particularly draws on books by Peter Hook and Andy Vass. These are examples of the books, and at the end there'll be a bibliography where you can get the full details. They're writing for the UK teacher and UK classroom, and we've adapted their ideas for ELT. Now, I'd like to place us in 5 different classrooms as a scene-setting maneuver. And the first classroom is appropriately a UK one. It's from a splendid book called I'm a Teacher, Get Me Out of Here, by Francis Gilbert. And I'm going to read you a little section from it. Will you be quiet? I need you to be quiet. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Will you listen to what I'm saying? Is anyone listening? Fatty, you're not listening. Grace, you're not listening. Bashir, stop fighting. No, Hassan, don't punch Fatty. Will you be quiet? I'm asking you to be quiet. I'm telling you all, shut up! My blood pressure has rocketed. I can feel the blood bubbling against my cheeks. My head is throbbing from the noise and humiliation of it all. And still the class is not listening. It's the beginning of the school year. That is a familiar experience for me. I wonder how familiar it is for you. Now let me take you to 4 more classrooms. These are from Europe and South America, although I suspect that the scenes I'm going to describe are common elsewhere in the world. I've been very fortunate in my life to be able to be invited by teachers into their classrooms, and I've learned so much from that experience. Here's the first one. While the teacher works with students at the front of the class, the back row talk among themselves in their first language. One girl ostentatiously sits sideways. The teacher asks her a simple question, using her name to get her attention. She replies in her mother tongue, "Nievin, I don't know." The teacher is aware, the whole class is aware that she does know. The question's repeated. The girl says, "Nirazumium, I don't understand," in her first language with a big smile, and the whole class laughs. Now let's fly to a different classroom. It's a very light-hearted atmosphere in this one, and it's not a large class. The teacher collects in the homework and flicks through the papers, but suddenly she stops, looks at one and then another and then another, and leaves the room. She returns in a moment with a pile of photocopies and gives them to the other students. "Do you notice anything?" she says. "No," the class replies. "Oh yes, you do," she says. "Oh yes, you do. Most of you've copied Muhammad's homework, haven't you? It's his homework you've copied." the whole class deny individually and collectively that they're cheating. In the end, the teacher gives up and gets on with her lesson. Later, a colleague explains, it's the bottom class. They all know their failures. They don't care. The next one is a brightly intelligent class. It's in a prosperous area. It's very tech savvy. There's IT all over the place. And the students are the top of the group, very, very good command of English. They are very good at playing the game of being students in a classroom, but they are also terminally bored. They do what they're asked to do, but they show no interest and no engagement, no motivation. And then this is our final class, and I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of you. The students in this class have excellent receptive and written skills, but they won't participate orally. They understand what the teacher wants them to do, but there is one thing they're not going to do, and that's speak English in front of their fellow pupils. So that set us right into the classroom now, and I'd like to draw on your experience. We've got our chat box here. I'm going to ask you a question and would like you to type in some suggested answers. I've just shown you a load of demotivated classes. We're all experts in that. I'm going to give you in a minute my top tips for how to demotivate students. But why don't you now put in your best idea of how to stop your students learning? Off you go. How to stop students learning. Yes, that's a good one, Anna. Shout at them. Confuse them. Yes, scare them all. Yolanda, give unclear instructions. Make them feel worthless. Bore them. Say you're useless. Well, my friends, I think I'm going to stop reading yours out and compare them with my own because they're very similar. Here are my suggestions. Think the worst of your students, not the best. Expect the worst, it's going to happen. Don't listen. Expect the students to be like you. Remember that these are students, not people. Don't notice if they get something right, but do pay attention when they make a mistake. Make fun of students when they make mistakes. Don't forget, you're the teacher, you're always right. And remember, whatever your students do is not good enough. And I'm sure that we're all experts in that from our own experience in education as students ourselves. Now, what we need to do is move from this situation, and I can see from the chat box people are suggesting being positive. I'd like to move on to a section of moving from the negative to the positive. But first of all, I'm going to treat you like a class and give you an instruction. So, heads up, looking at me, obey this instruction. Don't think of something red. Yes, exactly. I wonder how many of you thought immediately of something red. Giving negative commands produces a negative result. We're going to rephrase commands from the negative to the positive. So, for example, instead of saying, don't look at your books now, we could say, heads up and look at me. Let's have a look at these ones. There are 6 classroom commands. How could we rephrase them? How about the first one? Stop messing about. How could that be rephrased? Exactly. Yes, pay attention, pay attention. Several people are saying that already. Sit still and pay attention. Yes, Carolina, pay attention, exactly that. Eyes look at me. No walking around the room. Let's settle down. Very good suggestions. Here are my suggestions for rephrasing these ones. Sit still and pay attention. Not don't forget, but remember tonight's homework. Not don't be late. Make sure you're on time. Not stop talking, but be quiet. Listen now. Again, not don't forget, but remember. No walking around the room becomes sit down and look at me. So we're moving from a negative to a positive learning environment. Now, when we're giving instructions, I think it's very important that we expect them to be obeyed. So rather than saying, look at me, please, it's much better to say, look at me, thank you. And the reason why I'm focusing on the meaning behind words is that as teachers of English, we have a unique situation where the subject that we're teaching is also the content, the mode in which we're teaching it. We're trying to teach English through English. So the words that we as teachers use in the class are really, really fundamental. So give an instruction and then say, thank you. And I'm particularly interested in teaching teenagers, but adults can behave like teenagers, as we know, and small kids can be very lively. I think it's a useful concept of wait time. When you give an instruction, say thank you, and then wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, before proceeding. Give them time to respond. Right, this section is called the meaning behind words, and you've got 4 sentences there. The kind of typical things which a teacher might say to a class. How many more times do I have to tell you? Grow up, act your age. That's typical of you. And the last one is one I heard very often when I was at school. Oh, Philip, not you again. Now, all of these statements have a presupposition behind them. Let's see what those presuppositions are. Stupid. Baby. You're no good, you're a failure. And the one that I heard all the time. I didn't expect anything better of you. Now, if we establish that kind of negative classroom linguistic environment, we're going to hinder learning, not promote it. How can we get around that negative environment? Well, one way of doing it is what we've called using escalator language. This comes out of the Hook and Vass books, but Judy and I have adapted it for ELT. Have a look at these phrases and think how we could use them. Up to this point. Yet. Sometimes. A bit. Clear. Just. Have a little think for a moment about how you could use those when you're giving classroom instructions, and then I'll give you some examples. It's called escalator language because it moves the classroom discourse up a level? Let's see. So instead of saying, you've got everything wrong, you can say, it hasn't been too, and forgive me for my typo on the slide, it should be T-O-O, not T-O. It hasn't been too easy for you up to this point. Instead of just saying to someone who's not working, open your book, you can say, I noticed that you haven't opened your book yet. Yet is the escalator, which presupposes that they will do it. Again, instead of insulting the student, you can say it's sometimes easy to get this wrong. It's only the first part that's a bit difficult. We're using a bit here. Why, not why don't you understand, but which bit isn't quite clear for you yet? And then just finish the sentence and we'll do something else. Every classroom operates as a social environment, and setting the rules for that environment are fundamental. Time spent in working with your students on how you and they will behave in the class, for me, is fundamental. And in New Inspiration, we have a whole section on negotiating with students about how they and you will behave in the class. Zoltan Dernier and Tim Murphy put this very well 12 years ago. Real group norms are inherently social products, and therefore, in order for a norm to be long-lasting and constructive, it needs to be explicitly discussed and accepted as right and proper by the majority of the group. And we don't have time to go into it today, but in our teachers' books, we've got a lot on establishing learning contracts between classes and students. And obviously with beginners or elementary classes, this discussion would happen in the mother tongue. But it could be along the lines of, we as students agree to hand in our homework promptly, and I as teacher agree to mark your homework and give it back promptly. It's to do with mutual respect. We also don't have time today to go in any detail into classroom language. And again, in Inspiration, we have a lot of exercises for the students on the kind of words they need to use in class in order to learn English. Because in a very real sense, in the artificial classroom environment, the only time they may use English for a real purpose is to ask the teacher a question. Now, have a look at some of these. It's just jumbled words. Can you put them in the right order? For example, the first one, there's a word missing, I. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I think the other ones are correct. Excuse me, is this right? What does that mean? Please, can you help me? Which exercise are we doing? Is a very good question. What's the right answer, please? Now, moving on from that, the student language, we come to teacher language. We believe very strongly in choice in the classroom. In Inspiration, there are whole Your Choice sections in every unit where students can choose which of 4 activities they do. to reflect different learning styles. And in our teachers' books, we have a lot of choice for the teacher in terms of optional and extra activities. But today we're talking about the classroom environment. And I want to show you how choice, if you incorporate it in your language, can help influence student behavior. It's to do with establishing an environment, an environment where students choose to behave. So instead of saying, if you don't do it now, I'll send you out. Rephrase it. If you choose not to do it now, you're choosing to go out. Instead of sit down and shut up, I'd like you to choose to sit down and be quiet. And I'm sure many of you are parents, and this may well be the way in which you speak to your own children at home. Certainly, my experience with teenagers in particular is that, and me as a student, as a teenager, is that teenagers like to challenge authority. And as someone just said in the chat box, we need to get students to feel responsibility for their own actions rather than be bossed around, because when you're bossed around as a teenager, you react against it. You don't need to answer this question in the chat box at all, but I'll tell you a secret about myself. When I was at secondary school, I was in a situation where I was told to do something and I didn't do it. And I was expelled. They sent me away from the school. Fortunately for me, they let me back in a few weeks later. I won't ask you to say in the chat box that how many of you have been expelled from school, although I think Yolanda has just said that she was. And Hassan. And Anne-Maria. And Irene. So we're all a group of expellees. Always make the best teachers. Now, in terms of giving instructions, I want to look at a Vass and Hook three-stage approach to how you get students to behave. So it's not a confrontation. So firstly, say what you want. Okay, Tanya, facing me, paying attention now. Thanks. Notice the thanks. You're presupposing she'll do it. However, Tanya doesn't. She's turning around, chatting to the boy behind her. So you wait, and then you give the instruction again. Tanya, the instruction is to face me and pay attention. Thanks. And give her wait time again. And if she still doesn't, Tanya, if you choose not to face me and pay attention, you're choosing to move to another table. So very much putting the responsibility onto the student. Now, I'm sure being wise, savvy, Macmillan Online Conference goers, you've used your polling button before. But if you look in the left-hand side of the screen, you've got a button with a big tick in it. If you put your cursor over it, it says yes, no, or none. I'm going to ask you a question now, and would you like to respond yes or no? Very simple question. Can you control your students' behavior? Can you control your students' behavior? Yes or no? Interesting, the numbers are going up here. Numbers are going up. Twice as many people think it's 2/3, 1/3. People think they can control, and about 1/3 think they can't control. Now, my take on this is with the people who did the Red Cross. No. I can't control my students' behavior. The only thing I can control is my own behavior. And if I control my own behavior, that will influence the way students behave. Now, do you remember the bit I read you at the beginning, Francis Gilbert getting almost a heart attack at the students not obeying him? The first of 3 rules is don't have a snap response. If a student confronts you, don't react immediately. Hook and Vass put it very memorably. They say, don't have a guts to gob reaction. Guts to gob. Don't have a guts to gob reaction. Don't give a snap response. Secondly, take 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, when you're calm, respond. Because if you're calm, the students will be calm. Finally, think about your body language. I remember in secondary school, I had a teacher, and I can't demonstrate it very easily in this room, but I had a teacher who used to, when he was angry, walk around the room like this. And he used to lean over very, very close. Very intimidating. So the third point there is to think about your body language. Now we're getting close to the end, and I want to end on a very positive note. This is a quotation from an excellent book in the bibliography by Tony Wright on classroom management. And he talks about the trust between teachers and learners. And I can't quite read it. I think it's Svetlana has just written, treat other people as you wanted to be treated by them. Trust between teachers and learners is at the heart of the classroom climate. The foundations of trust are located in what Carl Rogers refers to as unconditional positive regard. And I would like to end on that note with Carl Rogers. I've made a little acronym out of the 5 qualities which Carl Rogers says you need to have positive unconditional regard. I'll give you the first one because it's a made-up word. P stands for prizing. By prizing the learner, by valuing the learner. What do you think A stands for? It's another ing. Type in if you can think. Prizing. What is the one that begins with A? I'll give you a little clue. It's AC. And another clue. A, acknowledge, appreciate. Accuracy is getting better. It's accepting. Accepting the student as she is. Not as her mother wants her to be, not as you want her to be, not as the society wants her to be, but just accepting the child as she is. How about T? Any guesses for T? We've got tolerance here. It's another ing, if that gives you a clue. Prizing, accepting, and now we've got T. Yes, Yolanda. Yes, Maria. Yes, Rizwana. Lots and lots of you. Trusting. And that was something that came up in the chat room earlier, that if you trust your students, there's an atmosphere of trust, learning happens. The next one, beginning with E, is a noun, an abstract noun. It's not a, Rizwana, I think, is there already. She's got empathizing. Julia's got empathy. It's what Carl Rogers called a sensitive awareness of what it's like to be in the learner's shoes. It's the ability to see the learning process from the side of the learner. So prizing, accepting, trusting, empathy. And the last one is what Roger's called the most difficult, realness. And by realness, he meant in the moment of tuition, in the classroom, giving all of your attention to the students. Maybe we teach 20 hours a week. Maybe we've got several teaching jobs. We can't love every student in every class all of the time, but we can be real to them in that tuition moment and give them all of our attention. So here is the answer, and well done everyone. I'll explain prizing again as Michele asked. Prizing means giving value to, making the student feel valuable. Realness means in the moment in the classroom, paying full attention to the learners. And to conclude, there is the bibliography. These slides Henry will make available to you, so you'll be able to get hold of this. But if you want to contact me to get the slides, my email was there, but it looks as if it's dropped off. But you can get the slides through Henry. So that's what I have to offer this morning. And thank you for all your lovely comments. I'm here now, so if you have some questions, please put them in. Please write the questions in the chat box. Nellie asks, are there any types of students? Yes, in Inspiration, we've identified 4 main different types of students, different learning styles. Students, we call them the players who like to mess around. Students who are thinkers. That's the student at the front of the class who puts his hand up and says, but why? So if you go back to psychology and the Briggs-Myers type indicator on which we based our questionnaires, there are at least 16 different types. I think the important thing about student types and learning styles is not to pigeonhole a student as you are this kind of learner, but to say, that's your preferred learning style, but hey, look, there are lots of others. Why not try those? Madeline asks, how do you keep a positive attitude when a student makes a gross mistake in a controlled practice exercise that you just explained? When people were guessing P, patience came up quite a lot. And I think we have to understand that teaching is a long game. Dick Allwright, one of my great heroes, and I was lucky enough to be taught by him at Essex many years ago, wrote a famous article in which he said, why don't learners learn what teachers teach? And I think patience is a whole lot to do with that. Learning a language is inexact. We are not sure. Learners don't necessarily learn what we teach. We need to stand back and give them respect and patience. Nellie asks, what do you do when 2 students are angry? I imagine angry with each other. I remember a classroom in a European country. The teacher was taking me to watch his class, and they were all girls in their teens. And we came around the corner in the corridor, and two of the girls were lying on the floor fighting and pulling each other's hair and scratching. And the teacher was absolutely wonderful. He walked past them, opened the door, let the other students come in and asked them to sit. And then he went outside. He left me as the visitor with the class and went outside and sat on the floor with the girls who were fighting, because he realized there was no point in integrating them into the lesson until they had sorted out what the dispute was. And he left me, the visitor, to entertain the class. I never knew what the fight was about, but after 10 minutes, they came back in, settled down, and the lesson went on. Someone here, very politely, Tanya, asked if I've written any books or articles. Yes, if you look on the Macmillan website, you'll find plenty of material there under my name. Can I show the book again? The three books which I took these ideas from, which are in the bibliography, are Creating Winning Classrooms, Confident Classroom Leadership, and Teaching with Influence. Should we be more like a friend, John says, or keep a distance with students? It's a really good final question. No, we can't be friends with all of our students. That isn't our role. But we can respect them as individuals and, as Carl Rogers was explaining, be real with them in the classroom at that moment and give them value and treat them as respected individuals. I used to teach groups of 60 or 70, and you can try and get to know each of them as an individual. But your role as a teacher is in many ways guiding, not being a friend. And we'll finish with a little bit of etymology. One of my favorite books is a dictionary of word origins. And if you look up the word learning in that, you'll find that, is that properly? In fact, yes. It's just coming from my office, and I've actually got the book. Very interesting book. And if you look up learn in this book, it says that learn in English comes from the pre-language before European languages, and is lace, comes a word lace, I've translated it as L-E-I-S. And that means gaining experience by following a path. And in answer to John's question, no, you can't be friends, but you can be the person further along the path, bringing your students with you. I can see Henry's face looking a bit anxious. He has to set up the next session, so I'll stop now. It's been wonderful meeting you all, and I hope to meet you in person one day. Thank you very much.
So welcome to my part of this Macmillan Education Online Conference, and we're going to be looking at things to do with pronunciation and vocabulary. So I hope that you can see the slides, and my particular topic today is making pronunciation enjoyable and successful, with particular reference to vocabulary teaching. So, I'm going to talk about three areas. The first is a general introduction for a few moments to this approach to pronunciation teaching. The second is specifically on vocabulary. And the third is to how your students, and indeed yourself, can continue this work using the app and one or two other things. So, let's start. First point to make, probably something you've often thought yourself, every lesson is a pron lesson, even if you're not teaching pron, because, of course, students are always rehearsing some form of pronunciation. You know, when we read and we write and we speak and we listen and we think and we remember, even when we do it inside our heads quietly, some sort of pronunciation is being rehearsed. And the question is, which pronunciation? If the teacher has taught the new pronunciation, that can be rehearsed. If the teacher has not yet taught a new pronunciation, of course, the student will have to use mother tongue pronunciation. That's the default position. So just a point there, which I constantly need to remind myself, that pronunciation is always in circulation. There is no lesson that isn't a pronunciation rehearsal. So anyone who says they don't teach pronunciation, it's not quite the case. Now, a couple of problems and a couple of solutions before we get on to the vocab bit. The first problem that I would just like to draw your attention to, and this is something that I work on a lot, is that for most students, and perhaps even for many teachers, pronunciation seems kind of mysterious. You know, what does it consist of? What is there? Is there a map of the territory? And the solution to that, in my view, is the Sound Foundation's pronunciation chart, which does provide a map, a thinking tool, and you're familiar with it because it's this thing here. And it shows all the sounds that are needed for words in connected speech. It shows how and where sounds are made, and so on. So let's just have a quick look at that. Here we are, here's the chart. As you can see, up here the vowels, over here the diphthongs, down here the consonants. Front of the mouth up there, over here's the back of the mouth, bottom of the mouth along there, top of the mouth along there, and so on. If we go to the consonants, then we've got the front of the mouth, back of the mouth for plosives, front of the mouth, back of the mouth for friction sounds, front of the mouth, back of the mouth for nasals, and so on. It's a kind of map, and it's all there. It shows all the sounds that students need for words and for connected speech. It shows all the simplifications and so on. So that's the whole syllabus. It's all there. It's just one page. Not like grammar and vocabulary, where we have hundreds of pages. This is page one, the end. This is all there is. So that solution, in a sense, that's solution to problem number one. What does it consist of? Well, this is it. Problem number two, and solution number two. Problem number two is that pronunciation often tends to be cognitively taught, but pronunciation is, of course, a physical and muscular activity. It's about muscular coordination, and in a way, it's more like teaching dance than teaching grammar. Pronunciation is physical. We can do grammar and vocabulary cognitively, perhaps, but we can't do pron cognitively. It's a muscle thing. So what's the solution to that? In my view, the solution is connect with the muscles that make the pronunciation difference. In other words, we have to develop a physical knowledge from muscular experience, as opposed to a theoretical knowledge from books, which is the kind of stuff that we teachers may well have. But actually, it's that physical knowledge that we need. And just as a reminder, there are two routes to making new sounds. One is through the ear, the typical listen and repeat. But the other is through the muscles, which is actually you know, the whole thing is not as simple as listen and repeat, because we have to access the muscles, because they are the ones that have got the habit of the mother tongue. We need to get behind that habit. Okay, so here is an approach which is what I use, which is thinking in terms of 4 core muscle buttons. 4 buttons. I use the word button because they're on computers and they're on smartphones, and buttons are everywhere. We press buttons to live. Rather than naming muscles and getting into that, I'm just thinking of this. Button number 1 is the tongue, which basically moves forward and backwards. It also curves. Button number 2 is the lips, which basically spread, and they can round and go forward, and they can spread and go back. Button number 3 is the jaw, moving up and down with the tongue, and button number 4 is the voice. Now, students do those all day long with their mother tongue, but the point is to be able to do that consciously and at choice in order to find new sounds. So we've got to reconnect with those muscles so that they can be done consciously to get behind the habit. And this is, if there's one new word from this webinar, it's this one, proprioception. Here we are, proprioception. That was a new word for me not long ago, and it took me a while to learn how to say it. I think you say proprioception, at least that's how I say it. And what that is, it's a word from neurology, which is the inner knowing or sensing of what our muscles are doing and how much pressure is being applied. So if you pick up a glass, you need to know how hard you're gripping it. Too loose and it drops, too tight and you break it. It's your proprioception that tells you that. And as far as pronunciation is concerned, proprioception is what will help us to get to know again our tongue and where it is, our lips, what they're doing, our voice on and off, and the jaw, and the interrelation between those 4 things. So, now I'd like to talk about vocabulary teaching with that little sort of introduction on which to base it. If I'm to summarize that introduction, it's basically there's a chart, and it is with that I think one can integrate pronunciation teaching in the class. And there is a constant reminder that pronunciation is physical. It is the physicality that we need to be working on. That means that teachers need to find these sounds in their own mouths to help students to do the same. So given that as a sort of basis to keep reflecting on, I'd like to look at ways of integrating vocabulary and pronunciation, ways of integrating pronunciation fully into vocabulary teaching. So what I'm going to do is to take 3 very simple routes. Each is very simple and each is pretty similar, as you will see. Once you get the hang of one, you'll get the hang of all 3. And I'm going to take a little text, a Macmillan text from a book, and out of that text I'm going to take just a few words and perhaps just illustrate with maybe one of those words. So in number 1, the first impression that students have of the new word is that they hear it. Perhaps you say it, or maybe they hear it on a recording. The second route is that the first impression they have of the new word is that they see the spelling of it. Perhaps they're in a reading text, or perhaps you've written it on the board. And in the third approach, the first impression that they have of the word is that they are saying it because you have fed them the sounds, and I'm going to illustrate that as well. So we've got these 3 different approaches, 3 different starting points for a new word. I'll illustrate them, and in fact there's something that you can use very, very quickly, but we're going to go a little bit slowly. So here's the first one. Right. We're using vocab from a course book, so that's our example. The course book is new, straightforward. Here's a little text, and if you just have a quick look at that text. So there we are. It's about a magician and so on. Now, here I've taken a few words, and these words are, let us say, the ones that we are going to work on or attend to in particular during this part of the lesson. So let's just, for the sake of argument right now, let's just take this word, magician, all right? So I'm going to illustrate these 3 route maps, these 3 routes to integrating vocab using that word taken from this text. So that's the kind of setting, the class sort of setting. So let's have a look at root 1. All right, I'm going to refer to the chart in a moment. Here's root 1. Now, take it easy. I know there's 12 lines there, but we'll just take them one at a time, and you'll see that this is terribly straightforward and actually already probably complete common sense to you. So, this is root 1, starting with hearing the word. Okay, so the teacher or the audio equipment says magician, let's suppose. Magician. I say magician. And in this case, the students listen internally several times. Let me explain that. I say it once, I the teacher, and you, the students, hear it inside your head, in your inner ear, several times. So I say magician. You don't repeat aloud, but you let it repeat in your mind's ear. So I'm just going to do that again. I say it once, and you let it repeat internally. Here we go. Magician. Okay, and what I hope is that you can hear my voice saying that word inside your head. Okay, so that's step 1. Just takes a couple of seconds. So instead of quick repeat after me, I'm saying don't repeat, listen internally. Then step 2, I say, okay, class, say it aloud. Let's listen to 1 or 2 people. And if you want to do step 1 again, okay, we can do step 1 again. So there's that pause while they taste the word internally in their mind's inner ear. Terribly important. Then the third question is, all right, you've all said it now. How many sounds do you think? And the students count the sounds in that word magician. It's not actually important how many sounds there are, but what do you do when I say to you, how many sounds in that word? Well, yeah, you start to count them, but how do you count them? You count them by separating them in your head. And it's a brilliant question for getting students to separate out the sounds in their mind's ear and to count them. They may have the sounds accurately or not accurately, but the first step is to separate them out. How many sounds are there? Oh yeah, right. So, and then I say, how many you got, class? And they say, oh, 5, 6, 7. All right, let's count them together. So I, with my fingers, I say, what's the first one? And they say, M, J, E, Sh. Where's my other finger? There we are. And magician. We count them on the fingers. How many sounds? 7. So then I say to them, okay, could you just join those sounds up? Make the word like in English. Say it nice and quick. It's a good instruction. In English, they know what it means. It means join everything up and say it with a bit of energy, you know. So magician. Before they were going okay, join it up, magician. So now what I do is say, okay, you've looked at the sounds, you've got an idea what they are, you may not be entirely certain, but now let's go to the chart and let's find them. So the next thing is, I invite a student to come up to the chart and say, okay, here's a pointer. You know how many sounds, you've said the different ones aloud, you point at what you think. So maybe the student more or less knows, so it goes there, all right, and then there, okay, and then there, all right, and so on. And the point here is that the student at the chart is silent. They're just thinking the sounds. They're not saying it, they're thinking them. So it's thinking internally and finding externally on the chart, like that. The rest of the class are actually saying whatever is pointed at. Not what they want the student to point at, but what the student actually is pointing at. So the student gets feedback on what they've pointed at. So if the student points there, the class says M. And if the student points there, they say If the student points there, they say J. But if the student gets the wrong one, suppose the student points there, they say M. And the student points there, and they say Ah. And that can happen because of the spelling. And then the student at the chart thinks, well, I'm after and they said Ah. So maybe I better look again. Oh yeah, let's try this one. So the student points there, and the class say Okay, and then the student at the chart carries on. Now I'm after J. Is it J? Maybe the student points there, and the class says K. and say, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I'm after, let me try again. So in this way, the students negotiate their way through the chart. And the thing is, it's very quick. After you've done this a handful of times over quite a number of words over a few days, the students are starting to get there to know the way around the chart. So anyway, let's suppose we get to the end. Here we are. Okay, said it. And I say, okay, class, could you say that nice and quick? Join it up. Again, do it in English. Student points to the chart. We've just done that. Student does silently. The class says whatever sound is pointed at. Once it's correct, I then again say to the class, okay, speed it up, get it in, join those sounds together, make it nice and English sounding. And then I say to that student, okay, could you spell the word on the board in ordinary letters? And here we get onto another kind of awareness. Ah, yes, in English, the number of spelling letters is not necessarily the same as the number of sounds. How interesting. This is a real awareness that we need to notice. So, how many sounds? Well, they already said. How many letters? Well, is it the same or is it different? So now I ask the student to take the pen and write it on the board. So you can see, although it looks long, it's actually it's a very simple sequence. Here, I'm saying the word. They're listening internally. They say it aloud. Then I say, well, how many sounds? They count it. We check that out. Then I say, can you point them on the chart? They do so. And then I say, okay, join it up, say it nice and fluently, and then write it on the board. So there's several steps in there. The first is to say the sound, the word. The second is how many sounds. The third is find it on the chart. And the fourth is now write it in ordinary letters. So there's a little sequence. You don't have to do that with every word. Just do it with some words. And you do it with any word that's causing trouble. It's problematic. Just slow down, and this is a way of doing kind of roadside repairs on individual words as and when needed. You might do this for several of the words that you've chosen to present, especially if they're new ones. Here's route map number 2, and it's the same except for the bits that are in blue. So you can see that this is pretty much the same idea as what we've just done. This time, the students start by seeing the spelling. In other words, whoops, there we are. Teacher writes magician on board, or someone writes magician on the board. All right, so now we're seeing it. There's some English letters. Maybe I know the word, maybe I don't know the word, but it's certainly not one I'm very, very familiar with. And the teacher asks the students to say it. We listen to a few people having a go at it. I, the teacher, perhaps select one that is, for the moment, good enough, or if not, I offer it myself. And then we're back onto the previous track. Well, how many sounds? Point out the sounds on the chart, and then write it. So we've just started at a different place, namely with seeing the word rather than hearing the word, but after that we get onto the same track, finding the word on the chart, dealing with any snags that arise as we do that, and finally saying it nice and quickly, and how many letters, how many sounds, actually writing it. So what we've done is we've found the pronunciation, we've found the spelling, we've got the rhythm of the word, and we've used the chart to kind of, as the whiteboard of pronunciation. The chart is the place where you can work out all this stuff. Remember that the idea of the chart is not to teach phonetic letters, not to teach phonemic symbols. The idea of the chart is to provide a map of the sound that happens to have phonemic symbols on it, but that's not what we're teaching. We are teaching awareness of the individual sounds, and especially where they are formed in the mouth and how they sound. So that's number 2, vocab starting with seeing the spelling. And here's number 3, start with seeing the sound. So you can input new vocab in this third way. So instead of writing it or saying it, let's do it this way. The teacher points out this on the chart. In other words, does what I have already just demonstrated. Here we are. So I point there, and the students say M. I point there, and they say point there, and they say J. Point there, and they say I. Point there, and they say Sh. No, sorry. Yes, Sh. Point there, and they say Point there, and they say And then I say, okay, maybe get someone else up to point the symbols, and I say, okay, join them together, make it in English. And then, of course, we need to get the stress on the second syllable. So I might say, hey, listen to me, guys, magician. Where's the stress? And I might get them to put it on the first syllable. So it's magician, or the second, magician, or the third, magician. And so they can just hear the difference and feel the difference in their mouths, so that they become really aware of the energy distribution that is at the base of word stress. So this way, I start by pointing that out in the chart. I ask them to connect the sounds, and I assist in finding the stress and so on. Then I say, okay, now join it up, make it nice in English, make it fairly fluent. And then again, these, how many sounds, count the sounds, and then I get a student to spell the word on the board, and perhaps I get a student to come up and point on the chart. So you can see that the same ideas are being circulated whichever way we start. We may start with seeing the word, or saying the word, or hearing the word. The same ideas come round, which is help the student to get some clarity, get it on the chart, and find the spelling. It doesn't really matter where you start, but those are the three things to do. In doing that, students are really beginning to understand pronunciation. It doesn't mean to say they're getting the sounds absolutely correct, but they are attending to the sounds. And just the fact of counting the sounds internally in their mind's ear is sensitizing them to what is a sound and which are the sounds that are English. They're beginning to hear them. So those are three ways in which I would work with vocabulary. You may be thinking, well, that's all very well, but if the students don't already know the chart, how can I do that? And the answer to that is, yes, you do need to put the chart into circulation so that it's a usable tool. For me, that takes about, I guess, about a lesson, or half a lesson. And you can see demonstrations of this on YouTube and on Macmillan Education. Just putting the chart into circulation so that students have got an idea of how it works and which sounds are where. They don't have to. It's not a matter of memorizing it. They get to know it as they use it. Now, I hope that you find that either useful if it's new, or useful if it's a kind of revision and a systematization of things. My basic point is integrating the chart with everything that we do. This means the chart needs to be on or beside the board at the front of the class. It's no good having it on a notice board at the side of the class or at the back of the class. It needs to be accessible. As I said before, the chart is the whiteboard of prom. You can use the ordinary whiteboard for grammar and vocabulary and stuff, but for prom, you really need something like this. Now, I'm going to just finish off by summarizing some of those points that might be useful to go over again. So here's 6 points. Number one, I suggest to any teacher, get easy with those three sequences that I've just demonstrated. You don't have to do that sequence for every word by any means, but it's good to be able to do it for any word. Number two, the person pointing at the chart does so silently, whether it's you or a student, and the class says aloud whatever is pointed at, and that gives feedback to the person doing the pointing. In English, it's just a great and very simple instruction, which means speed it up and say it with a bit of life and energy, and they all know what it means. And they find that amusing after they've been struggling to say a word with the individual sounds, then just put it back into context, make it with a bit of flow. As I said before, we're not teaching symbols, we are teaching sound muscular coordinations. And they happen to have symbols which eventually they will get to memorize anyway. As regards the meaning of vocab, well, you've already got your own way of doing that, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is, at the point of meeting the new word, get the pron in circulation. And look, here's the important thing. Physical, acoustic, cognitive, neurological connections. All right, there's a good phrase for the morning. These neurological connections are vital. They are vital memory hooks, and they start being formed immediately. That's why I say it's not good enough to present pron later on after the new language, because they've already started rehearsing it and forming the memory hooks with mother tongue pronunciation of the new English word. So we do need the new pron in circulation at the same time. So my little mantra is, pron at the point of purchase of new language. When you're buying the new language, that's when you need the pron, because that's when the memory hooks start forming. Okay, let's just move on to something which you may know about, you may not. There's an app. It's called Sounds, the pronunciation app, which goes with this chart, and for your smartphone. And it embodies actually these three ways of working with vocabulary and with sounds. So here on your left you can see the phonetic keyboard, the sound keyboard, and actually that's the same layout there as the chart, which is smart, isn't it? And over here we've got the ordinary keyboard. So the thing is, you can have a bunch of different games. Maybe you click and you have here, look, the word in spelling, and you have to find it. There's the word in spelling, and you have to find the pronunciation. Or you have it the other way around. You've got the word in phonemic letters, and you have to find the spelling. Or you can speak it and listen to yourself. So these are some of the things you'll find on the app. First, you can choose British or American English chart and a British or American English word list. We've been using the British English chart, of course. And even with the word list, you can listen to the model, you can record your voice, you can listen and compare, you can check word meanings. With the chart, you can touch to hear the sounds and touch to hear sample words. And then when you get onto the practice, again, you've got those same three things that I've just been talking about. You can listen and do games and little competitions and quizzes around listening where you select the phonemes to practice, you hear words, and you try to find the phonemes on the chart. Or you can start by reading it, and there you actually read, you select the sounds you want to practice, and you see the phonemic spelling, and you supply the alphabetic spelling. Or you can start with the writing, where you select the sounds to practice, and then in this case you see the spelling. So there are three ways which you can, and there's a lot of vocab on the app, and you can always top up with batches of 500 further words, which are easy to download. So that is the pronunciation app, and that that definitely backs up the same approach to integrating chart as a way of integrating the learning of sounds, the muscular learning of sounds, with the cognitive learning of meaning and grammar. Really important, they support each other. Last but not least, if this approach interests you and you'd like to develop these kind of approaches further, you've got various options. Number one is to go to my blog, which is here. Number two is to use these classroom charts. Well, I mean, frankly, I can't imagine teaching without such a chart, but then that's me. But I suggest that you get hold of them, and they're available from Macmillan, and they're free. You've got a whole bunch of demo video lessons, which I've done on, some are on Macmillan Education, some on One Stop, and some on YouTube. I've recently done 35 3-minute videos on each of the different sounds, treating each of the different sounds, and you can find that there at macmillanenglish.com. Pronunciation skills. So go along there and have a look at these 35 3-minute videos which are talking to you, talking to teachers. There's the app, which I've just referred to. There's my book, Sound Foundations, which of course has this and very much more in it. And finally, if you are deeply interested, you can arrange for in-depth teacher training. 1 day, 5 day, 10 days in your country. And these courses do exist here. At the moment I teach lots of university in the summer and at Bell Teacher Training Centre, so those things may interest you. So that is a very rapid run through the whole thing. And look, just just to finish with, I did a Macmillan tour in the Far East, and this was taken in Beijing. And everything, well, lots of things in China are big, as you can imagine, including this chart. So there I was demonstrating in this most enormous chart. There's no way of working with the sounds higher up. I couldn't reach them. And so Paz, who works out there, she took this photo, and we captioned it, the Great Wall of Sound. You know, Great Wall of China, ha ha, Great Wall of Sound. Anyway, there we are, the Great Wall of Sound, and that was taken in China. So that was a quick run through, and I'm sorry to have spent half an hour just talking at you. I hope that you found that either usable or interesting, or even possibly both. And it's the way of the webinar that I end up talking rather than interacting with you people, but I did have you in mind. Now, there may well be some questions, and I'm going to try to have a look at these. I don't quite know where to start with all the questions. Perhaps there aren't any questions. Oh, you said lots of thank you. Well, that's nice. Thank you for saying thank you. Let's see if I can find any particular questions. Yeah, this webinar will be available, I think, next week, and also the slides will be available separately as part of the webinar, but also separately, so you can download those. Yeah, that will be available. Let's just see what else is there. Oh, it's really nice to hear this. What do I think about teaching Pron as a separate skill? Well, I think for people that are interested in that, that's really worth doing, because there's no doubt that when people get interested enough, and when you've got a good methodology, it's possible for people to really acquire a very, very good pronunciation indeed, if that's what they want. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, good means easily intelligible. It doesn't mean without accent. Everyone's got an accent. It means easily intelligible, so that you can understand and be understood easily. That's, for me, the aim of Pron. Yes, I think that for people that want a separate Pron course, it's well worth doing that. But my first port of call really would be to try to integrate Pron absolutely fully, so that it is never absent from a bit of study. Every grammar point, every piece of working with vocabulary is full of Pron, both internally in one's mind's ear and externally. Well, I'm just looking through thousands of remarks here, and people seem the chart is huge. Yeah, it was huge. It was just immense. I'd like a chart like that to unfold in the classroom. It would be deeply impressive, wouldn't it? The book is out of stock. Oh, I'm sure we can do something about that. Well, I'm just looking through questions, and mainly there aren't questions. Mainly it's just nice comments, for which I appreciate. I mean, the point is this. I mean, pronunciation is really important because it helps people to be intelligible. But even more important than that, in my view, pronunciation brings language to life. You know, pronunciation is what brings language to life and life to language. Once you're working on pronunciation, the whole business of repeating structures, the whole business of interacting in class takes on a new glow, a new gloss, a new purpose. The physicality enters into it, the liveliness of gesture and body. The body, you know, it is language embodied. Pronunciation is not just certain sounds. Pronunciation is the whole embodiment, the use of muscles in enacting language. And we too easily get into our heads and get lost in our heads with all the grammar and vocab. But pronunciation immediately brings everything back to life. It just reminds you, hey, wake up, this is real stuff in real life. Pronunciation is what does that. So over and above it making us intelligible, pronunciation, I think, is what can bring joy and vitality to any lesson at all. So that's my view, for what it's worth. And I wish you all well. Teachers are very important people, and not everyone remembers that, but we know that. It's a very, very important job. So I wish you well, and good luck with it all, and a lot of pleasure in what you're doing, along with all the difficulties that I'm sure you face.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Adrian. Great job. Fantastic. I hope you all enjoyed that, everybody. And don't forget, we've recorded everything, and it will be available for you to watch again from next week, along with the slides, which you can download too. So, Adrian, you can turn off the camera and mic now if you'd like. Thanks for coming today into the office to do the talk, Fred. Great job. Okay, so I'm just going to stop the recording, and then I'll share the certificate with everybody too.